Boa tarde! Estamos aqui nós novamente, reiniciando o nosso ciclo de webinars Citrate Letra, aqui na FEFELESH USP, transmitidos pelo canal da FEFELESH. Aliás, inscrevam-se, coloquem o sininho, sempre coisas interessantes. E temos o prazer hoje, vamos iniciar o nosso ciclo com um convidado internacional, falando diretamente da Índia. Ele está lá, 10h30 da noite, ele estava me explicando. E o título é Can the Global South Speak? A South Asian Tryst. Tá. Ele é um assistant professor de inglês na faculdade. Estou lendo aqui do roteirinho que colocaram aqui para mim no site, então vocês podem ver os detalhes. Na City University, em Odisha, e ele está trabalhando, ele trabalha no Centro de Translation and Interpreting Studies, na City University, Índia. Ele também é diretor internacional do International Association of Echo Translation Research. Essa é uma das razões que a gente convidou ele, o John conheceu, o professor Windon, e esse tema de Echo Translation está cada vez mais aparecendo, Echo Translation, Echo Adaptation, então acreditamos que vai ser um webinar muito interessante para trazer essas coisas que estão sendo discutidas lá fora. Ele já recebeu vários grants, inclusive do International Association of Translation and Intercultural Studies 2018 em Hong Kong, e the British Academy Full Grant em 2019, olha lá, and the European Society for Translation Studies Young Researcher Travel Grant em 2019. Gente, eu vou deixar vocês, então, com o Windon. Ele vai falar inglês, obviamente, pedir para ele falar devagar, né, porque nós somos um país que alguns de nós entendem inglês, mas nós somos falantes de português. Vocês podem colocar as perguntas no chat em português, não tem problema, eu vou passar para ele, ou a gente traduz, ou se quiserem passar em inglês também não tem problema. Windon, it's your time, please, it's your floor. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening from India, and it is a great honor to receive an invitation from the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages and Literature and Human Sciences of the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, to talk on translation in the Global South. I'm indebted to Professor Silvia Cubello and Professor John Milton for inviting me to the research group on translation and adaptation studies. And I also thank all the faculty members and the officials and research scholars who manage the official channel of the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages and Literature and Human Sciences of the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. So today I will talk about the translation studies from the Global South, and the title of my presentation is Can the Global South Theorize a South Asian Tryst with Translation Studies? Let me present my screen. Is the screen visible, Sylvia?
Yes, we can see it. I'm gonna take off my video so you can.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the entire, the present study stems from a contention about whether the Global South can theorize translation, a field that has long been dominated by the Global North. This presentation will attempt to trace the notion of translation and translational practices in the Indian subcontinent, thus building an alternative discourse of theorizing translation from the Global South. The intention is not to summarily dismiss or collapse the Western paradigm of translation studies, but to critically engage with the field of translation as practiced in the Indian subcontinent, especially in the pre-colonial era, and how it passes on to the post-colonial times, thereby creating a balance in the knowledge generation, especially in the broad field of translation studies. Because I believe to counter the hegemony of global north in any discipline, a researcher located in the global south must present an alternative discourse within that discipline. This presentation today will examine the terminologies used to denote the exercise of translational activities in the subcontinent of India as much as possible and attempt to theorize them by creating different models of translation. By defining terms in depth like anuvad, tarjama, rupantar, vivartanam, chaya, and bhangoni, and positioning them into four models, namely translation as interpretation, translation as evolution, translation as illumination, and translation as fission, I will demonstrate new theoretical models from South Asia. Before I go into
Pinto,
this,
sorry. No. Can you just hide that, that thing that is saying that? Yeah, because it's great. Yeah. Because it was like interrupting your lettings. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So before I start, let me ask, what is the global south? Where is the global south? I will start with an address by the Indonesian President Sukarno, who in his opening speech at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, dated 18th April 1955, said, and I quote, "I recognize that we are gathered here today as a result of sacrifices made by our forefathers and by the people of our own and younger generations. For me, this hall is filled not only by the leaders of the nations of Asia and Africa, it also contains within its walls the undying, the indomitable, the invincible spirit of those who went before us. Their struggle and sacrifice paved the way for this meeting of the highest representatives of independent and sovereign nations from two of the biggest continents of the globe." Unquote. Amidst the Cold War between the West and the former Soviet Union, senior representatives from 29 newly independent African, Asian, and Middle Eastern countries met in Bandung, Indonesia from April 18th to 24th, 1955 to chart an alternative discourse for their people's social and economic development and to continue the process of political and economic decolonization. The coming together of these leaders resulted in the formation of the non-aligned movement and the concept of third world or South. The notable point in this first large-scale Afro-Asian conference has been the search for an alternative discourse which has been synonymous with the objectives of the third world, which latter has been resulted in South-South collaboration. In the post-Cold War era, international relations have been characterized by an apparent contradiction. The apparent geographical imprecision of global South affords us the option for adaptability. In this context, the editor of the famous journal, The Global South, Lei Duck, has uttered a fundamental issue, and I quote, "What remains paramount from the perspective of the Global South is to understand how forces that seek to impose exploitative and hegemonic economic and political forms have been and can be resisted both in discrete geopolitical spaces and through broader collaborative networks. I argue that in today's world, to understand the dichotomy between developed and developing countries, the frequently used terminology West versus East is not sufficient. The term West has gathered different meanings as geographer Martin Lewis and historian Karen Wigan have discussed in the book titled The Myth of Continents, a critique of metageography published in 1997. They cautioned the unconsciously held spatial frameworks that regulate our perception of the world and reevaluated the fundamental geographical divides we use every day. Therefore, I argue, in the context of translation studies, to delve into the complexities of power structure in the discipline, we need to come out of the false dichotomies between the West and the East and try to situate the divide on a large scale geospatial construct. I will attempt to adopt a more deliberate, spatially informed approach to the challenges of defining and comprehending the diversity towards understanding the act of translation across the globe. And it also prompts us to consider the significance of an approach towards the discipline of translation studies to realize that the defined global south can also contribute to the disciplinal study. So let me talk about the north-south divide and how global south can be conceptualized as the center. And I will start with the famous quotation by Julian Roosevelt, who said, "I am at war with my time," unquote. Since the late 1960s, a large body of literature has been produced in response to the north-south divide. A geographical representation of inequality is called the South. It is useful for assessing problems affecting peripheral civilizations, but not so much for issues affecting northern societies. The South has been applied to aspects of social life unrelated to developmental differences. However, the question arises, does the South also has the capability of generating discourses on its own? In terms of knowledge generation, the South has proven to be a great place to dump humanities and natural and pure sciences theories from the global North, ignoring the fundamental differences between the two halves. Can we, as scholars from the global South, challenge the unidirectional flow of knowledge production and theorization from the global North to the global South? While the North is associated with prosperity and progress, the South has come to represent poverty, marginalization, and life in the margins. But the question is how the world's compartmentalization around inequalities affects knowledge production. The global South has always been considered the recipient of theory, and the field of translation studies is no exception. Translation studies, like other social sciences and liberal arts disciplines, has treated Eurocentric ideas as universal, homogenizing differences by ignoring non-European ideas. Have we ever used equivalence theory, Scopus theory, and polysystem theory as Western translation theories in India? We have not, because we internalized European theories as universal and non-European concepts as other, as area. In terms of knowledge production, the global south has always been ignored, silenced, and marginalized. As such, the concept of non recognition should be used to challenge the subtlety with which the global north operates and levels everything global and universal. Therefore, the presentation will try to encounter colonial politics of universalizing the discipline of translation studies by putting forth theories of translation as practiced in India. It will wage a war with the colonial hegemony and strive to present the global south as an altered geocenter of ideas in translation studies, thus incorporating interactions between bringing by sorry thus incorporating interactions between and within the global south centers. It seeks to invert the north south barrier by bringing together plurilingual translation traditions from the Indian subcontinent. The presentation will discuss the global south's significance as a useful instrument for addressing the absence of translation theories in this geographic space by shedding light on internal disparities in the field of translation studies. And here I want to quote Maria Timosco, and I quote, translation studies must strive for more flexible perspectives, and the thinking of non Western peoples is essential in achieving broader and more applicable theories about translation. Unquote. Now, I will start with the first model that I have created, translation as interpretation. And I created this particular model based on two words, one Sanskrit and the other is Urdu. If we look at the practices in the Indian tradition, the first word that will come into our mind is anuvad. The practice of anuvad is originating from the interpretive tradition of language philosophy in India, which is basically hermeneutic in nature. Anuvad, as we all know, is constituted with anu, that means after, and vad, which means speaking of or speaking about, or discourse, utterance, statement, speech, reiteration, doctrine. Therefore, anuvad has been used for all kinds of reputation to speak after, reiteration, and retelling. The anuvad style approach has also given the interpreter and commentator a lot of freedom to interpret and therefore offers a different perspective marked by original and creative insight. Therefore, unlike the Western counterpart, translational acts in India never faced the anxiety to maintain the original meaning. Now, if we comb the etymological meaning of the Urdu word, another language from India, that is tarjuma, we will find that the word means interpretation. Tarjuma karna is to interpret. Tarjuma navis is interpreter. Tarjama hona is to be interpreted. Therefore, we can presume that the Urdu term is hinting towards the subjectivity of the interpreter or reader in the meaning making process, as against the strict adherence to the original text in the Western idea of translation. Tarjuma is hinting towards a varied range of subjective analytical reading, thereby breaking the strict notion of hegemonic relationship that exists in the West. If we look at the oral tradition of India in the pre colonial time, We can infer that the term tarjuma can also hint to the art of interpretation, which relies heavily on the skill of interpreter who mediates between the speaker and the listener. He or she grasps the content which is spoken by the speaker and then transfers the content to the listener using the tools of the target language. Mostly, interpretation happens impromptu immediately after the original is spoken. Therefore, technically, the interpreter's responsibility lies in delivering the message, often in a condensed form, but with a very judicious choice of language using his or her subjectivity. He is involved in paigam ka tarjuma karna, sending the message through interpretation. Therefore, we can presume that the Sanskrit and the Urdu word together hint towards the subjectivity of the interpreter or reader in the meaning making process, as against the strict adherence to the original text. In the Western idea of translation, Anuvad and Tarjuma suggest a varied range of subjective analytical reading, thereby breaking the strict notion of the hegemonic relationship that exists in the West and hinting at the art of interpretation in the pre-colonial India, which relies heavily on the skill of the interpreter who mediates between the speaker and the listener. Now I'll go to the next model, that is translation as evolution. Now, before I go into these two words, one from Sanskrit and the other from Malayalam, let me talk about the idea of life. While formulating the definition of life in the planetary systems, a committee assembled by NASA in 1994 followed Carl Sagan's idea that life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of growth, replication, and Darwinian evolution. Now, according to this definition, living species go through metabolism or chemical transformations in an environment filled with the right ingredients: water, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. As stated by Oparin-Haldane theory and later ratified by Miller-Urey experiment, if the fundamental inorganic molecules present on early Earth are given the right conditions, they can start interacting with each other and form organic molecules and thereafter evolves into an organism. Now, if we consider author, language, culture, theme, genre, authorial intention, and other textual elements as organic and inorganic elements, which by interacting with each other can form an organic text, living and sustaining in its own environment, can we then consider translation of it as an evolution and adaptation in the Darwinian sense, where a transformed species will evolve in a completely new environment, mutating with new sets of elements: translator, target language, target culture, translatorial purpose? Let us see through unearthing two specific Indian terms. One is Rupantar from Sanskrit language, and the other one is Vivartanam from Malayalam language, through which I will argue that this translation and as evolution model can be argued. Taking cue from the Indian aesthetics best explained in Bharata's Natya Shastra, that is the Indian dramaturgy, according to whom reconstruction of a well-known story is the higher form of creativity over original creation. And all these varied terms like Rupantar and Vivartanam, which are hinting towards the fact that translational activities in the pre-colonial India were having the existential primacy as the versions or renditions were enjoying the more important position than its original form. The multiple renditions of Indian Mahakavyas like Ramayana and Mahabharata in many languages of South and Southeast Asia are proving this perspective of Indian plurisemiotic practices. Rupanta was constructed by combining two Sanskrit words, Rup and Antar. The word Rup means form and the word Antar means change. Therefore, Rupantar denotes transformation of a text and would be equivalent to the words like rendition, adaptation, and version. This means that the text has not only undergone a word for word translation, rather, it has gone through a change of the form and has been given a new shape. If we look at the Monier-Williams dictionary titled Sanskrit to English Dictionary published in 1872, we will see that the word Rup, the root word of Rupanta, not only means form, figure, beauty, or aesthetics, but also it contains the meaning like ropa, that is the act of raising or setting up, ropana, the act of planting, ropita, the act of planting trees, and ropaka, planter. In another dictionary by Horicharan Bandyopadhyay, Bongio Shabdakosh, a Bengali dictionary, we see a comprehensive entry of the word rup. Along with these two most obvious entries like beauty and aesthetic, beauty and form mentioned above, Horicharan Bandyopadhyay mentions that rup can also means to plant, to sow. Therefore, we can excavate the organic metaphor of transplantation hidden in the term Rupanta. So, in this process, the whole text, with all its characteristics and essence, is made to be adapted to a different cultural environment which has different demands and can nourish the thought differently. The plant, once transplanted, flourishes in another geographical condition, which refers to change and new growth, as opposed to the idea of translational act as an act of consisting of loss and decay in the global north. The next term, Vivartanam, can be understood from the Darwinian point of view. The term Vivartanam literally indicates alteration or evolution. It is a derivation of the Sanskrit word Vivarta, which according to the Vedic philosophy denotes the altered representation or condition of the ultimate reality. Now, Vivartanam, in Sanskrit, it does mean alteration, and in Malayalam, it does mean evolution, were used in the pre-colonial times to convey the oblique and diversified idea of translational act as practiced in the pre-European Indian literatures. Following the Darwinian paradigm, an organism sustains and evolves with the changing environment due to its natural selection and Darwin's principle of the survival of the fittest is heavily based on biological evolution and adaptation of the organism through natural selection. Now, keeping these two terminological explorations as a point of departure, I thereby argue that we should focus on building a new theoretical discourse system of translation studies based on the ecological construction in the global south, specifically in the context of India. I argue that a careful reading of the two words, the dialectic between Rupantar as transplantation and Vivartanam as evolution, can further offer crucial insights into the process of acculturation through exploring different layers of the botanic metaphors located into these two terms. Thereby, we can develop the model of translation as evolution. Understanding these terminologies would also challenge the universal notion of translation as morphing the other, and we can illustrate how the locus of the text or the textual ecosystem can be transplanted from the microcosmic ecosphere to another eco-environment, keeping the eco-linguistic texture of the target intact to usher in an ecological paradigm of translation. Now let me go to the next model, the third model, translation as illumination. And for this, I have taken a word from another language, that is Hindi, the term chaya, which literally means shadow or shade. Now, medieval India did not believe in literal translation, even though Indian writers were familiar with the concept of verbatim translation, known as the Prakrit text into Sanskrit, that is frequently found in Sanskrit drama. Indians preferred adaptation to verbatim translation. Unlike the other terminologies, this particular concept, chaya, has a linkage into the ancient world of Indian Puran. Chaya is the Hindu personification and goddess of shadow, and a consort of Surya, who is the Hindu sun god. She is the shadow image or reflection of Sanjana, the first wife of the sun god Surya. Chaya was born from the shadow of Sanjana and replaced Sanjana in her house after Sanjana temporarily left her husband, Surya, the sun god. Chaya is placed in such a situation and forced to pose as an impostor. Chaya is not granted any authority at that place. She follows the instruction of the genuine wife and takes on the role of a replica. Now, this interpretation of the mythical Chaya, as well as interpreting it as an analog to translation, leads us to believe that translation does not come to operate on its own, but is instead installed by the original text. The original, or the real, brings in a duplicate to protect itself from the scorching heat and intense energy of the sun, which could be interpreted as the larger world that exists beyond the linguistic periphery in which the original was created, to save itself from the scorching heat and intense energy of the sun. Because the genuine is fragile and cannot endure the severe treatment it receives from the rest of the world, it puts forth a replacement in its state, which seems to be identical to the original but is not the same. Now, the duplicate is not only capable of enduring those difficult circumstances, but it also adapts to them and boldly continues to execute its duty with such perfection that the rest of the literary world would be hard pressed to identify the difference. Because of this, when a translation exceeds the border of the language of its birth, it is more resilient to the linguistic brutality and horrors that are perpetrated against it. It effectively fools people who are unable to access or appreciate the original by presenting itself as such, and they are pleased. It is nonetheless branded an impostor, deceitful and treacherous, as soon as its true status as a replacement is disclosed. In this sense, Chaya or the translation, despite the many services that she or it provides, is always connected with darkness, which is finally rejected in favor of the original Sanjana, who is the bright light. The conclusion that can be drawn from this view of Chaya's mythical origin, is that as much as the translation is similar to the original material and becomes its shadow, it is always given a second order position and is connected with a negative connotation. Now, if I interpret the same term Chaya from the theory of light, then we'll see that we all know that light travels in straight lines. In the case of the transparent item, when light strikes it, it may pass through the object without being absorbed. It may be reflected from a shining item, or it can be absorbed if the object is opaque, depending on the situation. When light strikes an opaque object, which stops the light beams from passing through, shadows are cast on the surface, that we all know. When an item hinders the flow of light, darkness emerges on the opposite side of the obstruction. A shadow is the term used to describe this darkness. The sun is the source of light that casts shadows on objects as it strikes them. Each day, as the earth revolves, the sun seems to shift its location in the sky, and the shifting angles of sunlight influence the appearance of shadow on the ground. Take, for example, standing a stick on the ground and watching its shadow move and change on a bright day. When the sun is low in the sky, the length of the stick's shadows increases. Now, if we analyze this concept from the scientific point of view, then we may consider the source text as the object on which the light falls and creates shadow of the object. Now, if we consider the light as the source of interpretation, then with the change of the direction of the light or interpretation on the static object comes source text, the shadow will also change its shape and position. Therefore, we can argue that the object of the source text can create multiple shadows depending on the direction of interpretation and analysis. Light becomes visible in space in various forms and is physically perceptible in different ways. The effect of the translational work depends on the process of looking at the primary version. Therefore, this Hindi term Chaya heightens the sensibility and potential of perception of the person who is perceiving and translating the text, and thereby we can create this model called translation as illumination. Next, I will go to the last model of my presentation, that is translation as fission. I will start clarifying this particular model with a famous quotation by Richard Feynman, whom we all know. And this statement Richard Feynman has given at the annual American Physical Society meeting at Caltech on December 29, 1959. And we all are aware of this noted American theoretical physicist and Nobel laureate, who is known for his work in the field of quantum mechanics. And the statement which shook the world of science at that time and got published in popular science magazines is, and I quote, "There is plenty of room at the bottom," unquote. Now, this very brief sentence shook the world, the scientific world. And while discussing the problem of manipulating and controlling things on a small scale, Richard Feynman, through this particular statement, tried to point out that it is time to go beyond the standard technique and laws to understand the nature and motion of nanoparticles, which does not follow the conventional laws of physics, such as Newton's law, and therefore he argued that we must go down and search around unconventional laws like quantum mechanics, which will satisfy us to understand the behavior of atoms and the possibility of their rearrangement in order to do wonders in future. Now, conceptual understanding about translation studies in the global north, as I said, always suffered the hegemonic thought process. We too, like Feynman, should go beyond the traditional ways of understanding the process of translation. For example, we have never thought about translation as a fission process because that will put an existential crisis on the very existence of the original as something beyond any change, not to mention fission or breaking of the original. Original has always been given a sanctimonious status in Europe from the very beginning. Any act to rupture or split the original into pieces to transform has always been considered as a sacrilegious act. Now, on the other hand, if we look at this particular Assamese term, by the way, Assamese is a language from the northeastern part of India. If we look at this Assamese term to denote the translational act, and the term is bhangoni, which literally means to break down, which hints a splitting or fission of the original, of the mool. Therefore, challenging the supremacy of the original, as we have seen earlier during our discussion about other terminologies like anuvad, tarjuma, vivartanam, rupantar, and chaya. Now, a deeper breakdown of the term can give us another opportunity to break away from the constructive notion of translation predominant in the translation studies of the global north. Analyzing this terminology through lexicons and etymology will help us to create a new model, namely translation as fission, which I argue can make a paradigm shift in the discussion of translation theories and models to comprehend the act of translation. Now, we all know that fission occurs when a neutron hits a larger atom, forcing it to stimulate and fragment into smaller particles. With this splitting, a tremendous amount of energy gets released, used as sustainable and carbon-free energy. Thus, fission can be triggered by exposing the nucleus to a high level of energy. Now, if we look at this Assamese term bhangoni, this term too was also used as a fission process where the translator acts as an external agent and forces the original to break into smaller pieces, smaller particles, so that it can be rearranged, made into another text that sustains in the new sphere. The process of bhangoni releases energy, which rewires the creative brain of the translator towards rekindling the text into something new. The structure of the original, which is very much embedded into its own linguistic, cultural, political, social, and environmental web, will be split into pieces through the fission process in order to rearrange the ingredients and combine the elements into another constituent text which bears the stamp of new surroundings. Bhangoni, therefore, involves molecular bond breaking and forming. The root of the word Bhangoni is bhang, which denotes to break, to disrupt. Profulla Datta Goswami, in his seminal article titled Translation, the Situation in Assamese, has stated, while discussing the trajectory of the term, that Pitambar, and I quote, Pitambar, who rendered a section of the Markandeya Purana at the turn of the 16th century, used the verb bhang to break. In modern Assamese, for noun we have bhangoni from bhang and anuvad, unquote. This description hints towards a phenomenon in nature that to understand the networks and structures, we need to break it first. This deconstructive mode of analysis applies from biology to physics, from chemistry to natural philosophy. We observe the presence of symmetries or patterns everywhere, but at the same time, to comprehend nature's deep design, we need to recognize the new objects evolve from broken translational symmetry. I quote from Wessel, a famous natural philosopher, who said, and I quote, "The symmetries that govern the laws of nature can be spontaneously broken, enabling the occurrence of ordered states. Crystals arise from the breaking of translation symmetry, magnets from broken spin rotation symmetry, and massive particles break a phase rotation symmetry," unquote. So any text, any composition forms a symmetrical pattern. And through the act of translation of that text or composition, I argue, new text ascends from the breaking of the previous symmetry. Therefore, the new text becomes a product of translational symmetry. Bhangoni, this Assamese term, is hinting towards the breaking of the symmetry or pattern. Translation, therefore, from this point of view, is an act of breaking down of equilibrium of the source text and creating a new text imposing another symmetry. The process of translation can be described as an act resulting from the spontaneous breakdown of unitarity or as a symmetry breaking act. It is not breaking the harmony of nature, instead, redefines it through a translational move. Translation, using the model of quantum mechanics, is a process where we first change coordinates and displace atoms from the equilibrium position and then introduce new coordinates and replace new atoms. Similarly, through Bhangoni, we break down each word, each phrase, each sentences to such an extent that we can reach the meaning that lies hidden under the multi-layered structure of the pattern. Bhangoni refers, therefore, to the breaking away from an already existing structure or convention by introducing new vectors. When a text from a regional language gets translated into a majoritarian language, a parallel stem breaks away from a steady flowing literary tradition to venture into a larger world. Thereby, the Assamese word bhangoni enables a text to cross over the threshold of its native literary tradition to now flow and merge into a global network of knowledge system. And this very act can only be possible when the translator localizes the new symmetry in the new space by changing both the internal particles and the external coordinates of the text. Now, let me come to the concluding portion of my presentation. And I will start the conclusion by mentioning the famous author, Andre Gunder Frank, who said, and I quote, "Structure matters," unquote. The well-known, if somewhat notorious turns in translation studies are indicative of a field of study that is still trying to find its boundaries. In subsequent turns, translation studies, we all know, has expanded, on the one hand, the ambit of its scholarly view from linguistics to pragmatics, to culture to sociology, to ideology, keeping in mind that some might arrange the list in different order to use different names of the terms. But on the other hand, these expanding efforts failed in expanding the notion of translation itself beyond the hegemony of the global north. Many of the implications of the terminological explorations still needs to be explored. But the key to the entire enterprise is to study the alternative uses of the term translation in other parts of the world. By alternative, I mean alternative to the idea of universal translation perpetuated by the global north. This presentation primarily focused on the heuristic potential of the South and how hegemonic agendas of the translational theories and concepts impact on the studies as a whole. Though we have discussed about the disciplinal study of translation here, but the larger focus in order to nullify the hegemony of the global north should be on the importance of the theoretical diversity, intellectual creativity, gender balance, the role of language, the variety of ontological beings and forms of conviviality, among other things, all of which have an impact on the present world. The theoretical framework I opened up in this presentation and the models drawn on the basis of the practices in Indian subcontinent in the pre-colonial time, which is inclusive rather than exclusive. I hope that through the various terminologies I presented, that this particular presentation successfully strove to approximate various complex layers of understanding the translational activities in Global South. I feel that the need of the hour to find suitable answers to these questions to venture into this field of alternative practices, which are till date the least explored area in the Global South. The North-South uneven gap in the field of humanities has long been reinforced, with the universal being formed by translation and adaptation of northern hegemonic objectivities to southern peripheral contexts of knowledge production and circulation. As was the case of translation studies, this hegemony produces and reproduces academic dependency in close association with the consolidation of long-term inequalities, narrowing the horizons of scientific imagination and impairing intellectual creativity, thereby consolidating the inequitable regime in the production and circulation of scientific knowledge. This presentation tries to explore how a spatial terminology from the global north has been forced on the plurisemiotic practices of translation in the Indian subcontinent through colonization and produced a long-term global disparity. When English and Anglophone goods predominate in the global networks of power and knowledge production, inequalities and asymmetries in power knowledge production are reproduced as well. Many academics believe that Anglophone academic discourses are the latest and most current, and that they are thus leading in the global knowledge creation. Other scholars, on the other hand, believe that they are following behind. In the preservation of this epistemic imbalance, language plays a key role. With Standard English today occupying the dominant position, most of the current scholars of translation studies, except a few from India like Sujit Mukherjee, Purushottam Lal, Harish Trivedi, did not try to explain the translational productions from the diverse categorization of the practice in India. Rather, the majority examined the translated texts in the context of academic reliance and imperialism, as well as gatekeeping methods to sustain the hegemonic frameworks of the discipline as practiced and theorized in the global north. Therefore, we have discussed the vital potential of the South in terms of accessing and resisting hegemonic agendas in translation studies. I hope that this presentation will be instrumental in understanding the global South as a useful instrument for addressing and shedding light on international disparities in larger academia. At the end of the day, South will be addressed as a concept associated with geographies of inequality and critical positionalities, but also as an attitude, a Southern attitude, which embraces an invitation for amplifying forms of ethical engagements that address social and scientific justice in general and create a South-South collaboration and position. I will end my presentation with the words by Pablo Neruda. Give me silence, give me water, hope, give me struggle, iron, volcanoes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is so nice. Very, very much. You know, I've been like trying to understand when I was reading about echo translation and those words started to appear. I was like, oh my God. So when John said, oh, we're gonna invite Rindan, I thought it was a great idea because your exposition was really very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, quer falar?
Yeah, I'll come in now because
Yeah, I know that you have your daughter.
Okay, let me come. I've got a number of points I'd like to make. 4 or 5, I think. So let's go through. I'll go through them reasonably quickly. Firstly, for the last God knows how many years, 50 years or something or more, I have totally ignored physics. After, I think, failing physics exams at school, I decided this had no interest for me at all. Recently, and partly, I mean, you emphasized this point. Physics can be very interesting and can have applications to areas like translation studies. I think you really reinforced that. And I've been reading 1 or 2 popular science works, which I found interesting. So, I don't know what happened. I never enjoyed physics classes at school. Maybe now's the time to get back into physics. That's the first point. The second point is Another way of looking at this is publishing, printing, ideas towards translation begin to change when mass printing takes over. We think of growth of the book market, copyrights, etc., etc. I mean, that's another way of looking at the need for a closed translation. I don't know any work that looks through translation specifically through the print market, the book market. Third point is, what's the third point? Yeah, the third point is, I made a presentation at an adaptation conference a year ago about the image of shadow, particularly in adaptation, looking at it through the Lupin Netflix series, which is called in the shadow, in French, à l'ombre de Lupin, à l'ombre de Arsène Lupin, in the shadow of Arsène Lupin by Maurice Leblanc, the popular detective stories written more than 100 years ago. But this image of shadow, and certainly your mentioning of Chaya, will be very useful for me to take up and include in this study. And your talk said, all right, gave me the encouragement to continue writing about shadow. Now, the last point I'd like to make is kind of runs a little bit contrary to the central argument. In many places in the global south, such as Brazil, there is a certain complex of inferiority in the academic world. Let me give you a prime example. In our area of humanities, particularly this area of translation studies, but not only, very few people publish outside Brazil. There is no absolute need to. I compare our areas with colleagues in chemistry, economics, here at the University of São Paulo, where there is great pressure to publish abroad. Now, in all the time I've been at the University of São Paulo, I've never heard of anybody being criticized for not publishing abroad. There is no need to, there is no encouragement. Yes, one of the main research agencies here in São Paulo takes this approach, but inside the humanities area of the University of São Paulo, we're not requested, or encouraged to publish abroad. There is a very strong nationalistic element, even in foreign language departments. And I think I'm not talking just for São Paulo, I think I talk for the whole of Brazil, contrasting with applied sciences, etc. Now, if we can look at development of this in all the congresses I used to go to before COVID, many people talk to me, say, oh, we want to know what you're doing in Brazil, but you just publish in Portuguese. Why don't you publish in English? So I tried to make some kind of excuse saying, oh, no, more or less what I've been saying to you, people don't need to. And I did an informal survey of Target, which for those who don't know is still one of the main journals in translation studies. I did this more than 10 years ago, about 15 years ago. And in first 25 years of Target, how many articles had been published from people in Brazil? 2, one by myself and a student of mine, Paulo Edson, on translation of important writer in the 18th century, and another by an academic from Minas Gerais, who now no longer on psychology and translation, but he no longer works in translation. And Gideon Turi told me how many articles had been submitted and rejected, and the answer is 0. So, people were not interested, didn't need to, etc., etc. Well, I've
John,
made, what, I've
even the
made 4 or 5
points.
points. I've
Yeah,
made 4 or 5 points. I'll pass it on to you then now.
No, what I was like completing that even when you do the qualis, like when you have to present your production, when you publish here in Brazil, it worth more than if you publish like a book in Routledge. So just happened to me, I was doing my CV and they said, "Oh, but you don't have anything here. You just have one." And I was, oh my God, I published a lot of chapters and etc. outside Brazil. But
Yeah, exactly. I know I'm waiting for people to throw me out of the postgraduate course through not publishing in Brazil, just publishing outside Brazil. That could actually happen. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm gonna read the chat now.
Yeah, I know. Does Rindan have something? I'm sure Rindan has some points.
Yes. Sorry. Yes, obviously. John just made you 4 points that I'm sure that you wanna. Then we go to the chat. We have time, okay? We have time because you are by yourself, so we have time.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, John, for your comments, and that I'm happy that my presentation today kind of influenced you to go back to the science and all. But let me come to this book market politics and all. See, when I was hearing you and I was thinking about the situation in India, the situation in India is exactly the reverse. We rather, the most of the publications, and currently the government of India is also kind of requesting us, kind of asking us to publish outside, publish in Scopus listed journals, publish in Routledge, Cambridge University Press, Princeton University Press, such kind of international presses. But John, one thing that I will disagree with you is that in India, the situation is exactly the opposite. We, all the translation studies scholars or the scholars from social science and humanities, we chiefly publish in English. And you know that how many languages are there in India. And most of the scholars, they do not publish in their own mother tongue. And that is why we work on the texts that originated in those languages, but we write in English. So in a way, I my specialization when I was doing my master's in comparative literature, my specialization very interestingly was Latin American literature. And we have been taught by a professor who knew Spanish and a bit of Portuguese. And she always encouraged us that you need to go beyond this Anglophone academia and you need to read texts in Spanish and Portuguese. And there's a huge academic sphere that lies in those two languages and other languages like Chinese and French and all. So we were encouraged. Being a student of comparative literature, I can say that. But when I look at, since now I work in a single literature discipline, English, we are so English centric that we think that things that are not published in English are not worth reading. But I mentioned 4 or 5 scholars. Harish Trivedi, I'm sure John, you know Harish, and he is one exceptional figure in the Indian academia who, sitting in English department, started working on Hindi literature and see how he changed this particular this field of comparative literature, world literature and translation. And other scholars, I'm sure you both of you know about Rita Kothari, who tremendously worked on Gujarati and Sindhi language. So I think see, I can understand the differences, but from my point of view, I would say that one also needs to publish in their own languages other than English, so that the critical notion, the critical language in those languages can evolve. And we need to say, for example, the tremendous growth in China, both in comparative literature and translation studies. And this is something I always say, probably you may not have heard of this particular thing, that both translation studies and especially comparative literature, these two disciplines started in Asia, in India. In 1956, we had comparative literature department. And now if we look at Chinese universities, all the universities are having translation studies, interpreting studies, comparative literature, those departments. Where are we? India. I'm talking about India. So the growth, because in our country, I must say that the Department of English is very smart. I do not know what happened in Brazil, but English departments in India are very smart. They quickly adopted all these new upcoming disciplines, be it cultural studies, comparative literature, translation, whatever. They quickly adopt it into itself. So these particular disciplines do not evolve and emerge. How many comparative literature departments are there in India, although it started in 1956? And you will be surprised to know that the center that I started 3 years back is the first interpreting studies center in India. And till date, that's the only interpreting studies center in India. But look at the tremendous growth of this discipline in China. And I strongly believe that happened because they produce their critical works in their own languages. You know who Gengshan, John, you met, and you know how I agree that sometimes that is over nationalism, but at the same time, we also need to work in our own languages. And we need to be truly bilingual, if not try, in terms of academic writing. That is something that I learned from scholars like Harish Trivedi or Rita Kothari or Shapon Mujumdar and all, that one needs to be bilingual at least in the academic discipline. So this is something I will definitely look at your paper on this Netflix series. And the complex of inferiority, John, it is there, it is here also. And that is why now I'm sure, I know that there are, there are kind of networks between Brazilian universities and Indian universities, but I think we need to create more stronger South-South collaboration in order to talk about our situations from our own perspective. Kind of creating a bypass route. Why always we have to go through Europe to discuss about these things? So this is something, and I follow you, John, for a long time. You know about it. Now I was reading a few works by Sylvia, and I think that the knowledge of the Brazilian academia, how they are working in translation studies, especially adaptation and all, which is something that India, I do not know any center till date, and I know it very well, that there has not been a single center which focuses on adaptation studies. So this is something we can learn from you. And I think this collaboration is much needed. And if we interact, more with one another, I think we can come out of this inferiority complex. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, let's think more seriously about cooperation after today. And I have to write this article on shadows, so wait a few months for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going.
Yes. No,
I'll be following in the car.
Tá, você vai buscar a Marcela, tá? Okay, he's getting his other. No, I was saying that I was surprised that you said that about the adaptations field, that every day is growing because everything is practically adapted from anything. So and more the people are more aware about that, and we are studying on and doing. There's a lot of media, new media, and transmedia. So it would be it would be very nice to really do a collaboration with you guys. I love the idea of this South collabs. And well, I'm gonna read something. Just arrive at a comment about what you were talking with John. And so Patrick Resende, well, Anita, that she's some it's a person that is always here in our webinars, and she said, "Congratulations for bringing up this issue." And Patrick Resende, he said, "Excellent counterpoint. Oh my God." Publishing in Portuguese is not only a form of resistance to the dominance of English, but also a crucial step in preserving linguistic diversity and asserting the importance of local perspectives. By doing so, we contribute to a more inclusive academic discourse that values multiple languages and the unique insights they bring to global discussions. So if you want to talk something about just one of the things that, we have to, a very big difference with you guys is that here we are mainly monolingual. You in India, usually, as far as I know, the people are more bilingual. Obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of people, they don't know English, but usually this is the idea that we have in India, that the people are bilingual. But for us, it's kind of hard to say, okay, I'm just going to publish everything in English, because a lot of people, especially if they are not from the English department or they are not linked exactly with translation, so like the people they are in Spanish departments or Italian or whatever, Arab, they sometimes they don't know English so well to like study and get papers and even go to events and present the work. So if you want to comment about Patrick, what he said here.
Yeah, see, as I said, that I agree, and I also agree with this point that the situation in Brazil and the situation in India, in terms of the linguistic differences, are a little different. We are mainly plurilingual, but unfortunately, Sylvia, the new generation is becoming very monolingual. Nowadays, they know only English, and the higher academia is flooded with the English academicians. So therefore, we are losing that plurilingual structure very quickly. But I hope that we will be able to preserve this particular linguistic diversity, which shapes the identity of India in the entire globe. We are known for that. I hope that we will be able to sustain that thing. Patrick, I agree that we need to publish in Portuguese, as Sylvia and John was also saying, but we also need to address the people outside that Portuguese speaking world if we need to communicate with them. I always say that one needs to write academic essays in at least two languages, so that that person can go beyond one particular linguistic boundary and can address the other. And we also need to encourage translation of academic essays. We encourage a lot of literary pieces, but we also need to encourage the critical material, critical discourses in other languages. So yeah, I completely agree with Patrick, but these are the two things I think I wanted to add.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so well, when you said the South collaboration, a lot of people love it, and Karen Cressy, she's from Argentina, she's listening us from there, and she also like it, and Anita too. So I'm gonna go back and get things that you said, and the people were like making some comments, and I got them. So Carlos Alonso said, we in the global South should not be ashamed. We are as smart as people as the global north. There are no limits for the intellectual work. Well, this was his first comment because he was like listening to you talking about that. I don't know if you want to say something or we go.
I completely agree. We need to come out of this inferiority complex, as I already said. We need not think ourselves inferior and always at the receiving end. We also need to understand that we also share the same globe and we can also produce the same critical knowledge and which can offer new insights to the globe. So this inferiority complex, I think we should. This is a mentality. This is an attitude which I think through this South-South collaboration we can come out of this particular attitude.
No, and I'm very pleased that you mentioned this topic about translating the articles, because this was one topic that was already mentioned in other events. Because to not go into the self plagium of to not be admitted like that, but just a translation of something that you did in one language and now you want to translate to another language because you wanted to widen up the public. So I'm very pleased that you mentioning this kind of things, because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, well he wrote this in already in Portuguese or in German or in Chinese, so now he's yes, I'm translating because you don't know my language, so I have to translate it. Well, one of the things that I loved when you started to say the translation as this concept of translation as illumination, just when you just started to explain, remind me the Lefebvre refraction paper. Did you see something like that, and you didn't remember about Lefebvre when you were talking about this thing or not, which is an impression?
No, I didn't think about Lefebvre when I was talking about it. I tried to, you may say there's a kind of a political agenda. You must have noticed that I have not cited any of the global north translation studies scholars or anyone. It was quite conscious choice that I made. I tried to analyze the entirety of it from my reality, from the reality of the Indian subcontinent. How can I analyze and come up with more and more metaphorical interpretations of the terms that we use? And Sylvia, these are very few terms that I have talked about. There are so many terms in almost all the languages. Some of the terms that, like Anuvad, is present in most of the Indian languages, but there are terms like Bhangoni, like Bhashantar, which are very peculiar, which is very limited to one particular language, like Chaya, very specific to that particular language. So because of my inability, I could not talk about all the words, but I must say that there are more number of words to denote the process of translation in other Indian languages. Had I known Tamil, had I known other languages, I would have been able to excavate. But I consciously did not, I know about their work, but I have not cited or I have not taken any inference from them.
Okay.
That is something I consciously did.
Yes. No, because I was directly sent it to the reflection of the light, and and it was really, really very nice. Well, Anita, she said, now she said very interesting, is a very complicated. I don't know why she was talking about that. I think that maybe it was about when you talk about the physics. And then she said, it's very interesting, is a very complicated question and always present in all the fields in architectural, she's an architect, translation and biology, marine biology, I don't know. They're sending you congratulations for the very, very nice lecture. And Patrick Presente, he said, a great lecture, truly appreciate the insightful and thought-provoking discussion. Thanks for the organizer for bringing such important topics. So, and facilitating the enriching exchange of ideas. So yes, the people really like it. And Anita said that she heard about a marine biologist from Sri Lanka that she sent here. The name is Asha De Vos, that she was talking precisely about the things that we were talking. So I know, it's just, the people in the chat keep putting things and I put everything here. So maybe you want to make some comment or not, whatever.
No, what I did, Sylvia, that I wrote down all the names, and I'm really thankful to Anita for mentioning this marine biologist from Sri Lanka. I see another thing that I couldn't talk about is that what I did, which John very smartly kind of understood, that I'm trying to liberate this discipline of translation studies beyond this literary and linguistic and comparative disciplinary boundary, and trying to engage this particular field from the perspectives of quantum mechanics, from the perspective of natural physics and all. So I will definitely look at this marine biology. In fact, I was thinking of something in that line, but I'll read this particular author, Asa De Vos. I wrote down, and I'll definitely contact Anita for more information about it. But I'm really thankful to all the listeners for listening to this talk, and I feel grateful to you. And this is not a customary congratulatory speech that I'm giving, but as I say, that when I was doing my master's in comparative literature, as I say, that I had Latin American literature as my special paper, and University of Sao Paulo is one university that everybody knows. It's the largest, if I'm not wrong, in Brazil, probably. I'm not really sure whether it's the largest.
We are the largest in Brazil, and we are now the best in Latin America. So
yes,
it's a place.
An invitation from that particular university is something that I will always remember, and I will definitely try to visit Brazil. This is one place that I wanted to. I have never been to Latin America, but I know John for a long time. I think since 2018 I know him, and he has been very kind enough. And now I know you also, and I know your colleagues also, and I am really thankful for this brilliant opportunity. And you won't believe me, I was so excited that I logged in. So it was scheduled at 10:30 p.m. Indian time, and I logged in at 8:30 p.m. Indian time because I was so excited about it.
I saw you there when I entered. I said, "Oh my God, he already arrived!"
Yes, I am very thankful to the department once again, and I hope that this particular lecture has been useful to your departmental lecture series. And this is something I was looking at the channel also. This is something I learned from you and from John. I read about the about section of this YouTube channel, that you too started this particular YouTube channel, and 51 key subscriber to an academic channel. I have never seen.
Let me correct. The channel is from the whole faculty. And this faculty is big because we are the one that get together, the people from philosophy human science, so anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
and also letters. So we have all the Chinese, Japanese, modern letters, Portuguese, linguistic, everything is in the same. So it's not our channel. What we started to do is putting all these seminars that we had since 2010, a presential thing. We did it at the university. Now, since the pandemic, since 2020, we started doing online, and well, it's been like 4 years. But all the all the viewers in the channels are not just for us. I would love that, but I have to correct.
No,
Just
no,
to be
thank you for that. But
okay.
I have noticed that you have organized a lot of lectures on
Yes.
adaptation, especially. This is something I will definitely talk to you in
Yes, no,
future
I would
times.
love to talk about that because regularly in Brazil, the people were studying more translation as everywhere. And John started to, be very interested in adaptation. And our research group is one of, at least was 5 years ago when I looked it up, or 4 years ago, was the only group is studying, like putting on the name adaptation. Maybe they will study adaptations, but not like as a name. And the group is a study of adaptation and translation. The group is a research group of that. So we are very interested in adaptations, and obviously we also have translation webinars. Usually when we have like some important author that was translated in Brazil, we bring people to talk about, and even if it's not in Brazil, or Brazilian authors that are translated outside Brazil, so we also bring them. And no, it's not only translation. Well, I just want to make you another question. Patrick Resende, he said, your work is intriguing, and I wonder if it has been influenced by the contribution of Nirjayana.
Yes, Tejaswini. Yeah, yeah. Actually, Patrick is talking about that famous scholar from India, Tejaswini Niranjana, who wrote that very famous book called Science of Translation. Uh, I was not directly influenced by Tejaswini Niranjana, but I must say, since you asked me, my work was influenced a bit by an African scholar, South African scholar, very well known, Kobus Marai. I worked with him very briefly. He taught me in a particular workshop, and that particular workshop kind of changed my idea towards translation studies. But yes, Tejas Niranjana is a big figure. Is somebody who worked on translation studies from Indian subcontinent and is widely known across the globe. So consciously or unconsciously, you will definitely influenced by Niranjana. You cannot avoid Tejas Niranjana. Yes, thank
Uh,
you for that.
no, yes, you see. Just wonder, it's a curiosity because you just mentioned that your country is becoming more and more monolingual. I just would like to know, this is like a politics from a new government, or what's going on? It's
No, no.
really changing the scope.
The government is encouraging the diversity of languages, but because of the politics of the higher academia across the globe and the constant presence of Anglophone or Anglocentric academia, that is one of the reasons that there is a chance that there are tendencies we can see where the new generation is becoming. But the government is trying very hard, in fact, encouraging us to work on our own languages, and they have taken the since 2007. There are attempts being made where the higher academia, the knowledge production can be translated, if that can be translated into all the major Indian languages, and there are institutions, there are associations who are working on that. And I myself, in fact, translated a mathematics book from English to Bengali. That is my mother tongue. So that is something that is happening, but it's not about India specifically. But if you look at the global phenomena, you'll see that more and more the very strong presence of this Anglo-centric academic world. So this is something that I think if all of us, a kind of counter by producing. I'm not against producing in English, but I'm also kind of encouraging all of us to work in our own languages and to write in our own languages, and that would be truly bilingual if somebody writes in their own languages.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, now I'm going to change language. Well, first, thank you very much, Brendan. Really, was a fantastic webinar. I really, really appreciate, and I'm sure that all our listeners, they are some of them are here, but usually, the people, they work at different times, sometimes, and they cannot see at the time, but after we close the webinar, it's fantastic because you just do boom and 200 viewers appeared. It's incredible. So I'm sure that a lot of people more people than there were today, they're gonna see your presentation. And I don't know if you put your contact or any link from your work, but you can do that, and we can put on the description of the video so the people can contact you directly.
Yes, okay.
Anyway, se vocês tiverem algum problema, vocês podem falar comigo. Bom, gente, estamos chegando ao final do webinar. Muito chique, né? Adorei trazer uma pessoa da Índia, a gente nunca tinha trazido, graças ao John, conheceu o Rindon, a gente teve essa palestra super interessante, muito diferente de tudo que a gente sempre está ouvindo. Olha o John no carro, John!
Eu estava escutando tudo. Então. Vai, então a gente fala depois.
Tá bom. Yeah, he's in the car. Tá, eu vou... Aí, bom, gente, nossos webinars são sempre assim, né? Especialmente o final, because John, he goes to pick up his daughter, so it's the time. Bom, ele colocou aqui, gente, peraí, eu vou passar para vocês aqui, ó. Vou colocar aqui no chat, tá? Para vocês. Obrigada, Patrick, obrigada. É muito legal fazer essas coisas e trazer gente assim como o Rindon, né? Bom, quero agradecer, como sempre, a todo mundo aqui. Quero agradecer a Jay, que hoje está com a gente no papel representando o pessoal do audiovisual da USP, essa menina linda, Jay. Agradecer o John, que teve essa ideia maravilhosa de trazer o Rindon. O Rindon eu já agradeci, vou agradecer de novo. Quero agradecer a Fernanda, que está sempre com a gente. Agora nós temos outra pessoa nova, nós temos uma outra integrante do Grupo Great, fazendo os flyers, é a Carolina de Jesus. A Fernanda vai ficar com os certificados. Agradecer vocês que estão aqui assistindo. Quem está assistindo agora, super obrigada. Obrigada pelos comentários. Anitta, muito obrigada. Patrick... O pessoal que está aqui, que eu não vi, mas eu sei que também está aqui, o Carlos, que estava aqui no começo, e quem está vendo agora. Bom, quero convidar vocês para o próximo webinar, que vai ser no dia 30 de agosto, então não na sexta que vem, na outra, que nós vamos fazer o lançamento da revista, do número especial da revista Cadernos de Tradução, que chama Os Muitos Mapas da Irlanda. É uma mesa organizada por uma outra integrante do Great, que é a professora Gisele Wolkoff, ela da Universidade Federal do Fluminense, e ela vai trazer algumas pessoas, não todo mundo, né, porque nem ia dar, mas algumas pessoas que deixa eu escrever aqui que é o contato. No, because you just send the Facebook, so I'm putting it. A Gisele vai contratar alguns dos autores que colaboraram com esse número. Então, quem gosta de Irlanda, quem estuda Irlanda, literatura irlandesa, adaptações, traduções, venha, vocês vão adorar. É isso. Well, Rindon, if you want to say something else, we're going to close now.
Once again, thank you to all of you, all the viewers and all the future viewers of this particular session. And thank you, Santana, thank you, Sylvia, thank you, John, for managing this session. And I also thank the entire department at the University of Sao Paulo. And I wish that I will be able to visit physically very soon.
Yes. Maybe we can do something together. Esqueci. Inscrevam-se no canal da Fefeleche, tá? Aperte o sininho, já tem quase 60 mil inscritos. E esse webinar vai estar também no canal do Great. Colocar aqui no chat, vocês entrem aí, sigam as mídias sociais do Great, vai estar no canal. Because we have a channel of our group, and we replicate the same, we put on a playlist. Então, gente, vejo vocês, nos vemos no dia 30. Beijos, venham todos para saber mais sobre as coisas da Irlanda. Bye, Rindon. A big kiss.
Thank you.
Tchau. Obrigada, Jay.
Thank you.
Tchau, manda um beijo pro Miraldo.
Good night from India.
Bye.